say that they're not quite good, but, oh.
Okay. Let's get ready. Call the special committee of the whole meeting
Is
to
Ken
order.
streaming?
He is 9 a.m. Wednesday, January 14th. Jody?
Thank you. Please note, special committee of the whole budget discussion meetings are streamed live and recorded on YouTube. Attendees acknowledge that in accordance with section 20 sub 2 of the Access to Information Act and section 4 sub C of the Protection of Privacy Act, names, addresses, and other details provided when speaking at a council meeting will be publicly shared. Should you have any questions related to the collection or disclosure of personal information, please contact the Legislative and Advisory Services Division for the Town of High River by sending an email to atipp@highriver.ca. That's ATIPP@highriver.ca.
Thank you. Adoption of the agenda. I'll ask for a motion from Councillor Nychuk. The council adopt the agenda for the special committee of the whole budget discussions meeting January 14th as presented.
Happy to do that motion, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. All in favor? Carried. Pretty easy agenda. Budget overview. Let her rip, Jordan.
All right.
Yep, that's Phil.
And Councillor McGonigal said she'd be about an hour late, so.
Okay. Thank you everyone for the opportunity to start these budget deliberations today. Oh, interesting. 1 second here.
You were good on the stream.
Okay.
That's his
Right.
sales page.
So on the stream, we're showing the main.
You are.
Okay. That's unfortunate. Okay.
Yeah, I think that's one.
Okay, so you get to see my script on the big overhead. Hoping to avoid that, but here we are.
You can't change that.
Yeah. Well, on the stream, it'll show the main presentation, but for you guys, you get to see all my encouraging notes to myself. You can do this.
It's all good.
Okay. All right, good. Well, thank you very much. This is the first day of budget discussions. I want to say this is the first time I've ever been in a municipal environment. This is the first time I've ever done a budget discussion in this manner. Usually I just go up to a CEO's office and we just discuss it and we sign off on it. So it's quite a bit different than what I'm used to. But thank you for the opportunity. So the primary objective today is we want to give a big overview of the budget process, kind of what we went through, what changed this year, so that you can kind of get context of where we're coming from for this budget. It's a transition year for us because multiple reasons, which we'll get into, and so we'll just fill you in on those details. And then over the next day 2, 3, and 4, we'll get into the nitty-gritty details of the budget so that you can understand it kind of on a more in-depth level. But for today it'll be mostly just a presentation. At any time you can step in, we can have questions, regular discussion kind of thing. But so this is going to be our agenda here. We'll start with the CAO introduction. We'll move on to just a little bit of Finance 101 recap, which is just basic overview of what we talked about in November for Finance 101. Talk about our budget process, a little bit of highlights on the budget process, highlights, assumptions. We'll go into some metrics of the financial position of the town before going into 2026, and then we'll break for the in-camera session after that. So I'll pass it over to the CAO Prosser, and then we'll get going on the rest of the presentation.
Thanks, Jordan. Name's just Chris.
Chris.
So, thank you. So this is budget number 5 that I've kind of supported, because when I first got here in 2019, 2 days after I started, we were into budget discussions. So it was kind of a hectic approach, and then of course COVID hit and we changed everything pretty quickly there to adjust for COVID. So if you can go to the next slide, please. So when we try and build the budget, we take a look at the strategic plan, the pillars that council has adopted, create a vibrant community, safety and security, health and urban environment, responsible development, and organizational excellence, and try and build that covering as many of those principles and those pillars as we possibly can. That helps us build that base budget, that helps us understand all the different things that are happening within the community based upon the feedback that we get from you guys through the year of things that you're hearing, and then we try and adjust those levels of service. Now, you're gonna hear a lot of this today. This is a budget year in transition as we move from one software system and one chart of accounts to a new one. And you'll notice that those that have been here previously have noticed probably if you've gone into the Excel spreadsheet, how expansive it is. And so we're getting into a level of detail that we're starting to understand how the money is flowing into different areas and different functions and how things are being measured up again. So that helps us from an organizational excellence perspective, give you guys better information, able to do better analysis, and build budgets based upon that. Next slide, please. When we take a look at it, we also take a look at your priorities. So we did our November 17th and 18th priority setting session, and there's nothing worse than throwing away the first year of a term, right? By just adopting what the previous council has done and just kind of continuing on, and then doing your priority setting session sometime in the spring, like a lot of communities are doing right now. So having it done kind of quickly after the election, we get you up to speed. I know it was kind of hectic and everybody was tired because there's a lot of information in that month of November flowing. But that helps us, from a budget perspective, make the adjustments necessary to make sure that we're covering all the things that council thinks is important, so we don't throw away that first year return. So as you can see, that council's top 5 strategic priorities, kind of our why. We're taking a look at the land use bylaw, which council approved, continue again moving forward with that on Monday. High Country Drive intersection, designs here for budget consideration, right? Council's, majority of council has approved the design. Now the design is here for budget consideration. It's a budget placeholder, and then the final decision whether we proceed or not proceed with that goes forward. Northwest Roads, Cold Trail, 64th Street, the options associated with those. And then, of course, the Northeast Area Structure Plan that's already underway. The second phase of engagement with the public is about to kick off. And then, of course, the sports fields upgrades. Looking for that final direction and reaffirming that direction so that we can move forward. And it's also within this budget context as well as a special project. Next slide, please. So when we kind of develop it, we take a look at the guiding principles. We want to make sure that we align with the goals in the strategic plan. We want to make sure it's aligned and supports council's strategic priorities. There's nothing worse than having a priority that does not have budget money to it, right? Talk about lack of success if you don't have any money put to it and you can't kind of make any progress until the following year. We also want to make sure that it's aligned and supported with council's adopted policies. Council's adopted lots of policies. They've adopted the compensation framework. They've adopted other policies that affect the financial management of the organization, so we want to make sure that they're aligned and supported. We also want to make sure that we're not decreasing levels of service. Without having that conversation here to say, hey, we think we can decrease this level of service with a reduced cost with no impact that the public would see, having that conversation here. So we're trying to maintain levels of service the way they are, as you see them today, moving forward. We also try and manage the growth and the development and the new infrastructure that's coming in. That has an impact. All that new infrastructure we see in new development, we now have to start maintaining, we have to start taking ownership of it, we have to start asset managing. And then contributing to that proactive asset management framework, which I'll talk about in a second. Asset management framework, I think it's at the tip of everybody's tongue with what's happened in Calgary over the last 2 years, right? At the end of the day, we don't have infrastructure that big that's going to have that significant impact. We have lots of infrastructure. We've been lucky too to have a lot of repairs done is recovery from the flood. And so that gives us a little bit of a heads up. Will we ever be ahead of the curve on asset management? Absolutely not.
Never.
It is just a circle journey that we continue the cycle of replacing and fixing and replacing and fixing and funding. That will be ongoing for eons in order to maintain that level of service. So you know, those are the types of things. So those are kind of the guiding principles that we follow. We talk about when we start with our budget managers to go forward with the budget and setting the field, so to speak, to make sure that everybody understands what we're trying to achieve. Next slide, please. Now, asset management. I guess this graphic actually details it quite nicely, right? It is a cycle. It's ongoing. To assess, to plan, to implement, to engage throughout that process, to communicate, and to review. It is a continuous journey that involves everyone in our town. Every person that works here touches it. Every person in the community that lives here also feels the effects of either good infrastructure or failing infrastructure. And so at the end of the day, that continuous journey needs to be communicated, needs to, you know, cost increase quite substantially that we've seen, especially through the inflationary period that we've just experienced. It takes all our skills and our actions and the information that we have. Now that we have a detailed asset inventory now in our system, we're building replacement costs, we're be able to build financial models to take a look at what, you know, to just give council perspective on what a tax rate could be in 20 years, right? We can start doing some of that modeling so that we can balance those things over time and be effective. And then making sure that we're kind of having asset management philosophy ingrained in what we do every day. And we talked about a little bit of that on Monday, leak detection processes, right? That's an asset management philosophy. That's an asset management process that delivers sustainable, resilient infrastructure over time. And so all those things get integrated into this process for what we call asset management. And so I think that's kind of the cycle that you want to kind of deal with. You want to understand that it's never ending. It's not like there's a timeline at the end that, hey, in year 25 we're finished and we can kind of take a breath, right? That's not what asset management's all about. It's ongoing and it's never ending. And it's, you know, you want to talk about job security, it creates job security, right, for a lot of people. Next slide, please. So the asset management principles, one, we want to make sure that there's value to the organization and to taxpayers. You know, there are communities that maintain assets in infrastructure that have no value to both the organization and the infrastructure. They just have historically maintained them. So it's understanding that asset and understanding, saying, is this actually delivering value, or is this something that can be deleted from the system? And so those types of things and understanding that. We want to make sure it aligns with all our objectives, that it fosters organizational excellence, that it supports growth to an extent, and that growth supports asset management, that we are leaders in it, that we take the leadership role, and the workplace culture is defining the realization of the value of that asset. And then, of course, the assurance that we will always have that the asset will fulfill its full lifespan as best as we possibly can. And that's kind of the underlying goal, is to try and extend these lifespans out and understand what lifespan is. There's not a lot of that, like, data's being built up over generations to say, hey, there's lifespan. And certainly there's been always this 25-year lifespan, but what we're finding is some things like pipes, you know, PVC pipes, asbestos concrete pipes that we talked about a little bit on Monday. You know, you're finding that they're having a much longer life than what the 25 years that was set originally. You know, I think there's one community that I worked in the Okanagan, we had an asbestos concrete pipe break, sent it off for testing, thought it was a major transmission main, sent it off for testing to see what the lifespan was, thought it had to be replaced that year, came back and had 75 more years. Just was a shift in the soil. So all of a sudden now you can reset your cycle and say, okay, we've got 75 years on that pipe, let's back it off 5 years so that at 70 we start doing more condition assessments, and then you can kind of reset your financial model from that perspective. So we always want to make sure that we're getting the full lifespan of it. There's nothing worse than building something and then 5 years later replacing it. Next slide, please. And so why does it matter? One, it is the premise of sustainable service delivery. Everybody depends on water, sewer, water being delivered to their house, sewer being taken away, and being able to drive up to their property. So it's about that sustainability. It's about building resilience. It's about quality of those services too. It is about taking the guesswork out of the decision-making framework. So instead of making the guess that, hey, that pipe is 50 years old, we're gonna replace it this year, is actually doing some of the work behind to build the case and the business case that that pipe is time to be replaced. It's cost effective and it is, you know what, if you want to, it is a strategy to work on getting the information and spend some little bit of money up front to get the information to determine when and get better information to make a determination when you have to replace that. So it could defer costs as well over periods of time. And part of it is to engage the taxpayers. Get them to understand that we are constantly monitoring our infrastructure system, constantly feeding information back to council to make sure that they're aware of it. And when we have to replace critical assets. And, you know, the water report, you know, a great example of asset management was we did that condition assessments in 2021, then we did the repairs in 2022 and 2023 to fix those leaks that we found in critical infrastructure that delivered water to the whole community. And so I think those are really key kind of ties. And then of course resiliency. It just builds that resiliency so that you can you can weather ice storms, flooding, those types of things, that you're effective and you're resilient from a financial and sustainable service delivery perspective. So I think that's all my slides. So any questions about asset management?
Chris, what's an example of, sorry to be an example of something that wouldn't be of value?
I'm just trying to think of some examples. I don't think I have an example here in High River.
Right.
But certainly, you know, I had an example in Peachland where there was an asset, an old schoolhouse that was dilapidated. They constantly maintained, but they had never spent the time to investigate whether it's worth saving or whether it's worth destruction.
Okay.
Right? And so they were always putting, you know, $30,000 of maintenance into it to maintain the roof, but they didn't really understand what the value was. And so once they did the analysis, they realized that, hey, it's got some heritage value and there's some community support for it. So it also changed it from not having value in council's eyes at that time. It had no value, they wanted to tear it down. And then the community came forward and stated. So that's probably an example. And that was something that's probably the closest example that I've had experience with.
Perfect, no, that's right there.
Town farm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, probably. Yeah, very similar.
Yeah.
That's a really good local.
Yeah,
It's a
absolutely.
really good local example.
Yeah.
Any other questions? Okay.
Okay. Thank you, Chris. All right, we're gonna get into, I'm gonna run through some Finance 101 recap from the last time. They're extracted, so it's not a repeat. I'm just pulling out the relevant ones that I think might apply for today. So it's not gonna be quite as long as the other one. So, like I mentioned, I'm coming from a different environment. So the municipal environment is quite different. So I bring a perspective from more of a private company finance perspective. So this slide shows a difference between private sector and municipal for these categories. So purpose and focus on the private sector is more about profit, it's making money for the shareholders, whereas at the town, it's about delivering services and maintaining a long-term sustainability. On the budget side and results, we budget in the private sector to make money. It's profit driven. Any excess goes into retained earnings and sits there, or we can expel it to dividends whenever the owners need or want. On the municipal side, we do not budget for an excess, we budget for break even, because there is no profit motive. So but surpluses often happen, and we use surpluses and we put those into reserves, typically, for use for the municipality going forward. This slide will show the basic math behind levies, tax rates, and how assessments kind of work together. So today, tomorrow in particular, and when we talk about capital budgets, we're primarily talking about the levy, which is this first one here. We're talking about all the costs that go into operating and all of the inputs and outputs that might reduce the levy, increase the levy. Some things that will increase the levy would be reserve top-ups. Like if we want to, whatever our reserve decisions are, do we want to increase the levy so we can put some more into reserves for future use. It will be reduced if we can collect more fees, for example. Or in this case, if we want to, transfer to reserves or top up reserves. And as you can see, this municipal levy here, it goes into the tax rate calculation. That's kind of fancy. If you take the total levy and divide it by our assessment base, so Stuart, our assessor, goes to the town, does a complete assessment of the entire town, gets a total value, chops it up into different asset classes, categories, and then we apply the levy that way using that assessment base to figure out what our tax rate is. And then after the tax rate, we apply that tax rate to each individual property to get their tax bill. So that's the basic tax equation. I mean, there's a lot more to discuss in each one of these, of course, but that's the overarching rule there. This slide shows this was 2020 or the last budget year's outcome. So you can see here the total levy that the assessor applied to the town goes here. You can see the different property classes and how they different levy amounts are applied to each class. And you can see the rate is basically a calculation that takes a levy divided by the assessment base, with a little variation between non-residential and residential. We'll talk about that later. And then I just applied a $450,000 property, and you can see kind of how that would be distributed between the different types of property. We're talking about levies here, so what does the levy kind of entail? So levy increases our operations, salaries, utilities, supplies, all of our costs that kind of flow into there. Levies can increase if we want to fund capital projects through taxation. Debt servicing, so we have some debt that we're servicing, so we gotta factor that into our costs as well. And like I said before, if we wanna transfer any money into reserves for the future, that will increase the levy. And like I mentioned before, user fees, sales, grants, fines and permits, and use of existing reserves can all decrease that levy. Okay, this one is, I like this, or I don't like requisitions, I'm not gonna say that, but I like how this shows perceived taxation for the town, because there are these requisitions that we don't actually get direct benefit from a town perspective. So everyone's tax bill is broken out into our municipal taxes, Alberta education, and our seniors requisition, and some other small ones, and it all builds into our tax bill, everyone's tax bill, but not all of it is controlled by us. So it does impact us in that if requisitions go up, it's a perceived increase in taxes, even though it's not actually on our side. So just want to point this one out. And that's it for Finance 101 recap. Any questions on that?
Not questions, I think it is just really important that we reiterate that to our taxpayers. And I think last year we divided it out on our tax bills so that it was a little bit more obvious about what it is we don't control or even get in our pocket, right? Our bank accounts to help service our town. So I think that is important, that is a piece that definitely needs to be highlighted as we go through this. Or not this specifically, but when we do put out our tax bill.
And that's our intent. Our intent is, again, to segregate those other outside requisitions because they're an external factor that affect our taxpayers, and to separate those out, whether it's a separate, some communities are contemplating separate bills, right? Or is it a separate box like we did last year? How can we make it clearer and more concise so that people understand that this is your municipal portion, and how much, we're also doing work on how much of the municipal portion being a portion to all the different levels of service too that are out there. How much is your tax bill going to fire, recreation, policing, etc.
Yeah, that's a good point too. Yeah.
Got a question on one of your slides there, and it's talks about the annexed properties, the classifications. So when does an annexed property change to the normal. And I'm just, I think 1/12 is a good example. There's some properties out there that have annexed
So if I recall the annexation agreement, it's 15, I believe it's 15 years from the date of the annexation agreement.
Right.
Or when there's a land use change that takes place for
Gotcha.
development.
Okay.
So at the end of the day, they get taxed at a significantly reduced rate. Right now, as it stands, is they keep the status quo because of that annexation agreement. But if they decide to develop or subdivide, then that's gonna be the change where they move into municipal taxation or the 15 years, whichever is earlier.
Okay, thank you.
So not even the completion of the ASB, doesn't? No.
Probably not.
Okay.
Yeah.
Makes sense.
That's negotiated rate
Yeah.
in the annexation, so we agreed to that number,
Yeah.
and, yeah.
Can you change that if you rebuild a road?
Great question.
That is a really good question.
My
I think,
question is that, you know, we're being asked to rebuild 112 along there, and yes, it serves not just those properties, but I'm hesitant to do that along a stretch of road where they're not paying town rates.
yeah, I think that, well, there's probably a couple strategies to employ there. I mean, one that you'll probably hear a little bit is if it's deemed a local improvement, there could be a portion of that could be attributed to them. Mind you, the larger benefiting community also has a benefit to an improvement there. But if you do a local improvement, you could at least attribute some of the taxation cost to them to pick up their fair share. The other aspect of things too is within council's control too, that if after the ASP, council wants to change the land use out there, because I think there's a clause in the agreement too, that if we change the land use designation, that there is a timing, that might be another trigger point for them moving to municipal taxation. So there are some tools, but they don't contribute a huge amount, right?
Mhm.
It's just super, super low.
Chris, the road is already in offsite levies too, so I mean, that could be an option going forward as well. Once we have the SP nailed down and know what that looks like.
Okay. Alright.
I forgot my hearing aids.
Alright, we're gonna get into the budget process for this year. 2026 was different, and we'll get into that right now. So what we asked the departments to do this year was to recalculate their funding needs for this year, which is a little bit different approach. It's what we call a zero base approach. And so they have to build up from the ground up, so all of their inputs and all the drivers that are causing these costs to actually show up in their budget. We asked them to justify every spend as much as they possibly could, try to tie it back to the strategic priorities that you guys have laid out for us, and yeah, provide the details for that. So that's what we asked them to do last year. But I want to talk a little bit about zero-based budgeting. Like I said, we start from zero, and the idea here is that we don't want them to anchor off of last year's number, because the tendency it's not a bad approach, because you can kind of build up a slow understanding of taxes over time, but it can often overly smooth some costs. Whereas if you build up from zero base and you kind of are blind from last year, it's kind of a more of a realistic view of the costs that will come flowing into their departments. So that's what we asked them to do this year. There are some benefits and trade-offs to this though. The benefits is that it does improve justification for this year, rather than just anchoring it off of last year and just showing like a flat inflation increase or something like that. We can really build in the justifications for each cost. It also resets our expectations for those cost drivers. because they're building it from the ground up. I feel like it actually supports a better, it's more responsible in my view to do it this way, in most cases, because it does, just because it gives you a raw, real look at the costs you're expecting to come into each department. So I'm a huge fan of this, doing it this way. But there is some trade-offs to this. It's less comparable year to year, and this year in particular is hard to compare because of our major GL structure change. But zero-based budgeting by itself makes comparables a little bit more difficult. Again, because they're not anchoring off of last year and just kind of trying to see changes from last year, they're building from the ground up. So you can see a little bit of skews here and there to see, just to kind of readjust to reality. Yes, and the trade-off is the anchoring from last year, going year over year, using prior year as your anchor, can smooth your costs a little bit nicer, so it doesn't shock those who are evaluating the budgets, whereas zero base has that risk sometimes, because it's like, well, I'm thinking this from the ground up, costs are this, it might feel like a little bit of a shock, so there's some trade-offs to doing it this way. But on by and large, I feel like it's the superior method. So let's get in, any questions on that zero-based budgeting approach? Yes.
Jordan, I always found that zero-based budgeting was more accurate. Like you can refine a budget much more if you go zero-based and justify every line, but you can still refer to last year's invoices
Yeah,
to do that.
for sure, I fully agree with what you said there, yeah.
And the other purpose too is to apply a degree of reality to everybody too, right? We can be as humans, we can be overly optimistic that we're gonna achieve all this stuff. And then we just keep it in the budget because we just add 2% to that line item, but we still didn't achieve it because, we end up with a big surplus at the end of the year. And so it's about revisiting that and say, are we being too optimistic? Let's be back to reality. Are we double budgeting again for that same project next year too, and that making sure that we're not,
Yes.
in essence, overtaxing?
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. Any other questions on zero base? Okay. All right, let's talk about what changed, some highlights to this process. The big change here is our coding structure, our new GL. We just went through accounting system go live this January across this budget time. It's been very hectic in the finance department right now. But this new go live brings in a whole new GL structure, and I'm planning on giving it like a better overview tomorrow before we go into our operating budget to explain just how it works. But it includes hundreds of cost centers compared to last year, or however many decades we've had Bellamy. And it will improve our cost understanding going forward significantly, because we can get into deep details about, like, we have a cost center for vandalism. So we'll know exactly, once we get a few years of understanding of costs and how they flow through, we'll be able to slice and dice and get exactly way more accurate picture of where money is spent in the town. So that's a really good positive move for the town, in my opinion. Like, I think that this was a great decision going into this year. But it does add some challenges for our budget this year. Year over year comparisons are really hard to line up on a one-to-one basis. That's what we all wanna see. We wanna see a trend line on individual rows of expenses and watch how they increment up, or if they've changed because of service levels. And so it's really easy to analyze. But this year, the cost structures changed so much, we've done our best to line them up so that it's meaningful information for budget deliberations or analysis. But it is still a difficult thing to do. Like, for example, we have some expenses or expense categories that have been split into like 5 different categories and placed different places, just to get more accurate. So that's, I just want to emphasize just how much of a change that was. Where am I at here? Yeah, so we did build comparables as best we could, so when you see, we did line them up in a way that was as accurate as we could. And then we rolled up all these hundreds of cost segments or cost centers into segments so that we could look at them and analyze them on like finance or like public works, say, so. This year we focused like the main focus for this year, I think is partially driven by the big structure change, is to really focus on tax supported services. What I mean by tax supported services is anything that isn't utilities, because utilities is self-funding, it's got its own, they're like business units. And then everything else is tax supported services. So we really dived in deep to that this year. We really want to make sure that there's a sustainable, taxation for tax funded services. One thing we're explicitly trying to not do is have utilities fund back into tax supported services. And this year, budget highlights is that 2026 cost pressures really have put us into danger of this cross subsidy under a revenue neutral approach. So that's probably something we'll get into in more depth later this week. Any questions on budget process highlights or comments? All right, we're going way too fast for our timeline. Okay. Okay. All right.
Your duty.
Okay. Great. All right. Let's talk to some highlights. With our new cost structure, with our new GL structure, this year we've separated out solid waste as its own utility. So last year was built into the tax supported services. This year we're gonna show it separately, which I think is exciting. The goal is, like all the other utilities, to be self-funded, and any excess or surplus would be reinvested back into that. We would like to manage it in the same way as water, wastewater, and storm. So I think this is kind of an exciting move. I don't think it's a surprise to anyone, but I thought it was cool. Yeah.
I'm glad you're jacked up.
About solid waste.
Yeah.
Yes.
All right, so the theme for this year, in my view, is the cost pressure analysis that came from the zero-based budgeting. So we've seen all at once a whole bunch of cost pressures hit us all in like the same year. So we've got internal policy decisions from previous council decisions are putting upward pressure on costs. We've got economic forces that are forcing raised costs through contract services or just supplies in general. And then we've got increasing compliance requirements on the side. We've got fire, even in finance, we're getting pressure to go through this ARO reporting process, which is looking to be costly. And wastewater treatment is another compliance requirement that's putting pressure on projects coming down the pipeline. Repairs, replacements, and expansions, like aquatics expansion. So we got all these pressures that are pushing on our cost requirement this year. That's what we found. Here's some extracted ones, some select ones. We've got RCMP contract on the horizon. Right now they're in deliberations. I think, when did their RCMP?
The contract expired March 31st, 2025, and just before Christmas, we got a letter from the RCMP that their proposals are to advise municipalities to budget a minimum of 3.5% back pay for 2025 and for 2026. If their negotiations go like they have in previous years, it'll usually be year 4 that it takes about 3 years for them to negotiate a contract, so we'll have potentially 3 years of back pay. I think the number that we've come up with is about just under shy of $200,000 for those two, for 2026 and 2025 to budget for. And that's one of the cost pressures, not including, reaching 15,000, right? That's another cost pressure that's on the horizon, pretty close. which is about a $1.1 million hit.
Yeah.
So policing costs are climbing dramatically.
Is there a federal representative that negotiates that? Because that back pay piece drives me absolutely freaking bonkers.
There's a provincial and a federal committee that negotiates the contract.
Who appoints them?
I believe it's the province.
Thanks.
Yeah, perfect.
There is no municipal representation on there. That I'm aware of unless it goes through RMA.
All right, yeah, RCMP, population tier risk, as our population increases, we get into a new tier, we're coming up to that. Fire,
Jordan,
Yep.
just one thought, as we approach that 25, that 15,000 population too, needs to be a conversation about whether we investigate an independent police service or not, and what that business case, if there is a business case to be explored or not. And so, that is something that we probably have to have conversations through 2026 to see if that's something that we want to start building, and whether or not there is still the provincial support funding out there to transition like other municipalities are seeing, like Grand Prairie, for example, is transitioning to their own police force. Not that I'm an advocate for it, but there are better control mechanisms when it's your own versus the RCMP.
fire, training and compliance, I understand that there may be insurance impacts to residents if we fall out of compliance on certain areas, so that can continuously push pressure on to make sure we're in compliance, which means we gotta invest some costs into that. We've got existing compensation policy that consistently moves the cost needle up as well. Recent aquatics expansion is gonna add cost pressure for new staffing requirements and operating costs. And then with the economy and just regular inflation, contracted services, any inputs, building inputs, whatever materials we have also has a cost implication. And general public expectation and pressure for maintaining or improving service delivery costs money. So those are some extracted key drivers. There are more, but that's kind of like big, broad, sweeping one. There are some revenue pressures as well going the other way we mentioned requisitions and non-town taxes that kind of look like town taxes. If those go up, it's perceived as town taxes going up. So that can also have pressure on us to control our revenue inflows as well. And there's always pressures to control our town levies because no one wants an increased tax bill. So there are some revenue pressures that we face. We get pressures from both ends.
Well, I think we already know that some of those are going up, because I think Kathy brought up that Westlands, there's a 2% increase, right? And I think education was, what, 14% or something?
I think their preliminary numbers last year when they released them, because the first year was gonna be 19% increase based upon equalized assessment, and then this year is supposed to be 14% based upon equalized assessment. Now, that doesn't function in the additional growth and the additional volumes that were brought on stream either, so don't exactly know what that percentage will be until the province releases it at the end of March.
March, okay.
Okay. The next slide is some assumptions that we built into this budget. We opted for forecasts whenever we want to apply an inflation rate. We just went with a flat 2%. It's pretty standard. People think 2%. Reason we didn't go more detailed than that is because the types of costs that the town actually incurs don't fall nicely into just like the consumer price index. It also falls into the building construction price index as well. So we use both. So we just went 2%. So there's no, it's pretty standard. That might change for different. I think compensation used a different standard because it's more focused on I think CPI. So they did their own analysis, which makes sense to me because it's very focused, but for everything else, we just use a flat 2%.
Do we know what, like in Alberta, what sort of like the inflationary rate was for all of Alberta. We don't.
Should have written that down.
Oh.
It should be in here somewhere.
I can, we can get that
1.9.
information. That's easy,
Yeah,
that's
yeah.
easy enough to get.
What did you think it was?
I thought maybe when we searched earlier, it was coming up around 1.9 currently.
Oh,
I can double check.
I think higher, okay.
We'll get the right information. We get the CPI and the BCPI as well. Just to show comparatives.
Alberta's inflation rate for 2025 varies, with recent figures showing it at 1.9%.
Nice, good job. All right.
Michelle, our resident AI.
Exactly. All right, and I just pulled an extract of our current projects just to kind of remind you what we're also gonna be talking about next week on the capital side. Wastewater treatment plants, upgrade design, fire truck replacements, we'll talk about garbage truck replacement, fleet replacements, Crescent Avenue Southeast Mains, Wallaceville pathway lighting, and High Country Drive intersection, just a few. There's more, as you've seen in our little package there. Okay, any questions on assumptions? Comments?
The briefing notes for your capital.
Thank you. Thank you. The briefing notes, so every one of our projects has an attached briefing note. Those will be sent to you in a special link today. At one point, so like if you wanna look into any one of those, like that, in the original package, we had a list of all of the asks for capital. Each one of those will have a briefing note attached, so you'll get a link so you can look at the details of each one of those. All right, let's talk about some metrics. I keep bringing this up, but I've come from a different area, so I was really interested, like, how do you measure the health of municipal financial environment? So I did some Googling, and I figured out some metrics that can kind of tell you the health of how things are going. I didn't reference our previous manager's metrics, because I wanted a fresh look, so I went a different direction. I can get you any metric you want, but I wanted to highlight these ones to kind of give you a sense of how we're doing. First off, we actually have mandated metrics by the MGA. They require us to fit certain metrics. First one is debt limit. We can only go, like, our total debt cannot exceed 1.5 times our revenue. And our debt service limit, which is interest and principal payments, cannot exceed 25% of our revenue. So those are the ones that matter. And when I run these numbers, we are well below these limits. So we're only using this is in 2024, 6.5% of our debt limit, strong and improving. We paid off a little debt here, $466,000, so this is improving in 2025, and our debt service utilization is super low, so we're nowhere near our limits, lots of room. Here are some select financial health metrics. So net financial assets per capita is the town's financial cushion after liabilities on a per resident basis. So we basically take our net financial assets, so that doesn't include like capital, like fixed assets or anything, minus our total liability to see kind of how we sit, and we have quite a large cushion there. You can see per resident, we've got $1,581 in 2024. It's pretty good capacity. It's a capacity metric. Days cash on hand is a metric that shows how long the town could fund operations using cash and investments if revenue stopped. So you can see here that we've got a little over almost 2 years worth of excess. I mean, that would never happen, it's kind of nice to see kind of where we're sitting in terms of what's available.
Don't say never, because it did happen in this community.
Okay, sorry. And capital reinvestment scenario, this was ratio rather. This is a ratio of our capital spending over our depreciation. So, I have it written here. Compares investment over 5 years to asset wear, so depreciation. So are we replacing assets at a big, higher rate than they're depreciating? And we're at 1.76, so we are investing more in our assets than we are, and it's depreciating, so I call that responsible. I mean, this can be skewed by new development, doesn't necessarily mean reinvesting in existing assets, but it shows that we are investing in the community. So it's all pretty good metrics from my perspective.
I have a question about the previous slide, if I can interrupt you.
Yeah, absolutely. This one here?
The debt service level, in terms of the aquatic expansion, are we including that as a whole in that, or are we just taking chunks as we use it?
The aquatics isn't borrowed money.
Yeah.
Sorry?
The aquatics isn't borrowed money.
No, I know that,
Right.
but how does the aquatic center factor into that, I guess is my question, or if it doesn't, it doesn't.
No, it wouldn't, yeah,
Okay,
yeah.
thanks.
No, we're good there. Okay, this is the one metric that I wanna draw your attention to. We use this one metric, it's called coverage ratio, which measures our tax supported revenues over our tax supported costs. Remember, non-utilities, we're not talking about utilities here, just tax supported revenues and services. And we wanna see based on, like if we used a revenue neutral approach, which is basically the same levy plus new development increases at the same tax rate, how our revenues would cover our costs. And so if you are under 100%, that means that under a tax neutral approach, we're underfunded. So when we run this ratio, you can see that under a tax neutral approach, we're only covering about 93 cents on the dollar at that level. So if that happens, we have options. So we can fund it through higher taxes or increased levies, cover it through reserves. We can use utilities, we don't wanna do that. Or we can change service levels to close that gap. So that's one thing that we'll have to address through these deliberations, is this 93% coverage.
And so in the tax supported expenses, does it include everything or just like none of those sort of extras or special costs, right?
So the tax supported funding that you saw in the budget document includes those external factors that we talked about, so the aquatics expansion, the RCMP, cost of living increases and compensation strategy, and some of those other cost factors that we're seeing impact on. So that is the all in. And that's also after several cuts of a zero-based budgeting approach, going back to the budget manager and say, okay, let's go through your justification, let's get that reality check lens on it as well and say, can you actually achieve this? I know that's your preferred model, and we got to a point after 3 different cuts, sitting in this room with all our budget managers going through and getting it really, really fine, right? So this is where we're at, and this is the conversation. We knew that we would have to have a tax increase of some kind to cover the cost of the additional costs associated with the aquatics expansion, right? We knew that was coming. We don't tax for it last year because the service wasn't available, right? So now we're getting to that point that we're gonna be taxing. So this covers 7 or 8 months, but knowing that there'll be a full tax impact the following year. And this also includes the RCMP back pay.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay.
Any other questions?
It's just not a very good picture right there.
No.
Like,
We've had luck.
bluntly, that's a scary picture to deal with.
Yeah.
Those numbers and that percentage right there.
Yeah, you've got about a $2 million gap,
Yeah.
right? which is a 2% tax increase.
Yeah, please.
Huh?
It's not,
No, a $2 million gap, isn't it?
No, it's more than
It's a
that.
tax rate increase. not-
Tax rate increase,
Not levy.
yeah, yeah, not levy.
1% generates, what, 1.50 tax million, 1.2 million, maybe?
Yeah.
Yeah, well, we'll talk through it.
Maybe 2%.
So, yeah. So that's the reality that as we get into this detail and all the fingers that we're starting to pull out with this new GL system, this is what we're starting to find.
You're saying that $2 million gap does include the aquatics expansion?
Yes.
That's
Yes.
the service level there?
It's the all-in.
That's the all-in.
That's the
right?
all-in
So
menu, yeah.
the all-in menu says 2%.
Or whether we're dealing with
Not
it
that
right
dumb.
now, or we're dealing with it in 2027, it's like, it's realities that are forthcoming.
Right.
Yeah. Well, and certainly there's strategies, because we've talked about strategies as well, because, say for example, the RCMP contract. The last update I got from Greg in November was that we were down 7 officers, so we'll see a credit from their overall contract in the spring. What that number is, it's dictated by the RCMP, and they give us kind of an equalization approach. And so they won't necessarily meet their full obligations under the contract because they've had so many vacancies, so many injuries, maternity leaves, transfers, et cetera, and so, there's ways that you can use the balance. Is it the right way? It's not the right way, right? It's not the right way, from my perspective, is being blunt, being forthright, and saying, hey, these are the numbers, how do we get there, and is it a series of cuts versus trying to soften it based upon what we know and what we expect to have vacancies in the RCMP as just one number, right? The idea behind the RCMP is budget for the full contract, everything in. If they're under, set that aside into a reserve so that when the $1.1 million comes in, we have something to soften it with, right? Because again, that's on the horizon. And we spent, in 2021, I think it was $600,000 on back pay with the RCMP contract, something like that.
When we go, you talk about the contract, which is their contract, do we have a contract with the RCMP? And if so, how often is it renewed, or is it?
So it's renewed, basically now with their kind of, I guess, union. It's on right now a 4-year term, whatever the term that they negotiated. It's negotiated based upon the provincial aspect of things, and then it's trickled down to the municipalities based upon the continent. So like I say, we don't have a lot of say in it.
No, I realize that.
Right? We even don't have a lot of say on building improvements over there either, because they dictate, they have standards that they won't disclose publicly, and have preferred contractors. So we have a lot of issues from that perspective when it comes to the UC. Now, at the end of the day, you can't argue that they don't have a presence, right? Some people will say they don't have a presence, but we do get a presence within this community. We get great levels of service, relatively good levels of service that complements our bylaw enforcement. And so, at the end of the day, it's those kind of conversations we have to have. So, now, here, under the MGA, some communities just take all their revenue, put it in a bucket, and then source it out. Including utility revenue, right? We've kind of created this business unit approach, and been working towards that for quite some time, actually, even before I was here, to segregate out the utilities to make them independent business units, so that the revenue is sustainable over time, and that it's clear and transparent to the public that we're not subsidizing recreation by water utility. Right? Yes, there's water in the pool, get it? Right? But we're not subsidizing operations of fields and the ice arena with utility revenue. So we want to make sure that that's clear and distinct. So again, it's been a long process separating all. We're getting closer and closer to really understanding it.
So with the police, just as an example, I know that's not a separate business unit, right? But you had just made a point where we had like 650,000 come back, whatever it was, for, I'm guessing, because they didn't have the amount of officers, right?
Yeah.
So then does that just get dumped back into general, or does that get dumped back into general with some specific notes, like that's going towards?
Our practice has been to put it into reserves
Yeah.
with restrictions.
Okay.
And at the end of the day, when you take a look at protective services, like, you gotta remember, general taxation is the catch-all for everything that's not water and sewer and storm and garbage, right? It's the catch-all. That's roads, it's bridges, it's recreation, it's fire, it's bylaw enforcement, it's policing, it's general operations, it's council, right? It's the catch-all of everything. And so there's a lot of stuff that goes into that general fund, so to speak, that needs tax support. And certainly some of it's utility supported, because there's, we have in finance, a utility clerk that in the past may not have been funded properly from that. Our CSRs take bills, right? They take, utility complaints. So, some of Nicole's time is not always public works, and in general, it's actually split up into utilities too, right? So we're kind of going through this reallocation process to make sure and to justify all those things, to make sure that everything's kind of where it's supposed to be, so we get the real costing for every service that we provide, right? And so we understand, so we can do modeling on utility rates and understand if we're charging enough from that perspective to cover those costs and the capital reinvestment. So.
All right,
Questions?
What's our current residential dwelling number? Like, not the last census we had, it was about 6,000. I mean, do we have a number where we're at now? Like, I guess, taxable residential dwellings.
We talked about 5,200.
Yeah, that's the utility account numbers that we have. We have about 5,200 tax or utility accounts, but I don't know about the total properties. We can get that number.
yeah, we get that number.
I've always played with 6,000, like 5,800 to 6,000 for properties, because there's vacant lands that don't have utility accounts attached to them.
Yeah, so utility accounts would be the accurate representation of
No,
taxable properties, right?
that would be the accurate depiction of occupied properties.
Didn't those numbers come when we did, assessments? Our assessment?
Yeah, the assessment classes would have the detailed number of properties in
Yeah, I
there.
think we have
Yeah,
that.
we get that, we get that. Assessment would be the good place for that. Okay, all right. Any other questions? Okay. All right, and then one other small item of note is that we retired some debt this year, which is a happy situation.
And that number includes that number.
Yeah,
So that includes that retirement, to retain that. We've checked with municipal affairs. Municipal affairs was very, very clear that most communities don't necessarily speak to it. Jordan, you,
yeah, I talked to municipal affairs and they said that, well, first off, when you retire debt, we have no requirement to publicly state it or tell what we're doing with the excess revenue that happens. Debt rate gets retired all the time in municipalities, and if they had to do something like that, it would be a part of like every agenda basically throughout the province. So they said that, yeah, once we retire debt, we can repurpose that for anything we'd like. In our case, we just put a placeholder into reserve. So, yeah.
but it's council's choice too.
But yeah, of course.
Yeah, council's choice can put it into reserve, put it into operating, or put it into, return it back to the taxpayer. But that's council's choice.
Yeah.
This budget package proposed has it going to capital reserve.
Okay, so sorry. Are there MGA rules on how you handle that money?
There's, when I talked to municipal affairs, they said nothing. They said there's nothing that they're aware of. Yeah. They say if they urged us if we knew of anything to let them know, cause they're not aware of it.
Oh, Jesus.
It's becoming that kind of response is becoming a theme every time we ask them. We know.
It needs to be recorded.
All right, so, as you wish.
I think until they condense the MDA and understand it themselves. Could be hard.
That's funny.
We'll be talking about this later.
Yeah.
Thanks.
I have a number for total properties from 2024 assessment, 6,519.
Commercial and residential.
Yeah, it's everything.
That's everything. Yeah, and it-
Yeah. That makes sense. Because the 2021 census, I think it was just under 6,000.
That's not, sorry,
No, that's okay, I'll just plug it.
I was just saying that was not including exempt properties, so if we included exempt properties, it'd be more.
Thank you.
You wanna explain that properties?
I wish Stuart was here to do you do a better job than me.
Because those are all the ones that are exempt under the Assessment Act. So, like churches.
Is the provincial buildings included in that too?
No, they're GPOT.
Okay.
We get grants in lieu of property
Yeah,
taxes.
so they
They're up to
would be in that.
50% now, they're up to 50% now, but they would be,
Yeah.
oh yeah.
So then they're in that number, I guess,
Yeah.
roughly, the commercial residential number
Yes.
you just gave us, so, okay.
Should be. Yeah, exempt also includes affordable housing that the town owns, copter exempt properties included in the exempt properties too.
And this is coming from Michelle AI.
No,
Yeah.
I pulled it from the assessment.
Thanks, Michelle.
Chat Michelle.
Yeah.
We'll come up with
Thanks,
something.
Michelle.
Sorry. All right, that is the end of my section. The next thing on the agenda is an in-camera compensation discussion.
Any questions before we go on camera? No, I will ask for a motion from Councillor Cooey that council recess the special committee of the whole budget discussions meeting January 14th at 10:08 a.m. and move into a closed meeting.
I will give you that motion, Mayor Snodgrass.
All in favor?